what I got set up for tonight is probably relatively irrelevant to what has just happened. And basically, I just want us to kind of clear our minds a little bit and just kind of come back to the place that we're at right now, if we can. And kind of, because before we go any further, I think we have to get permission from Lauren to proceed, which I think he's given us. So thank you, Lauren. You know, somebody's been spending a lot of time when they could have been doing something productive
It was productive.
for the community. Okay. So a lot of you know that I use a lot of humor and cartoons in my slides over the years. And basically, it's because I believe that humor and cartoons are a way to communicate and help facilitate communication. So a lot of you have been waiting. People have come up, are you going to do cartoons tonight? Are you going to do cartoons? And the answer is obviously yes. So those of you who've been waiting and holding for cartoons, this is your moment. Okay, well, if one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that everything is upside down and changed and we have new perspectives. Can you all read? Here's the thing. I hope you all can read some of the fine print in some of these tunes. I like cartoons because they're like visual puns. And sometimes all it takes is changing one letter or reversing a letter and it changes everything. So one of the things I like to do, because I read how many people here actually read the funnies in the morning? Does anybody read the funnies? I'm the only person here that reads the funnies. Anybody? There used to be a guy on the radio when I was a kid, before we had television, and Uncle Roy at KTSM in El Paso would actually read the cartoons, the funnies over the radio and tell you what was going on. So I got into that from the radio. So one of the things I like about cartoons is like they are like visual puns. You can take humor to another level just because you can. So I love the way the cartoonists. Now, everything that we do is based on our perspective. This one takes a minute or two to get. Before I go to the next slide, does anybody not get this one? Because it's always about perspective and it's always about our interpretation of our experience. We never really have reality. It's about our interpretation of reality if you study epistemology. So I want to thank the staff here. We've had several buffets here. Now you know how they keep things warm in the buffet. You have how many people remember Sterno? Right? Sterno, the little. But food is a very preferential thing. People have a lot of rational, irrational food preferences. And I love how the cartoons kind of show how we are about food. Frankly, I would be on both sides of the highway. Sometimes it's a verbal pun, visual pun. How many people here like Caesar salad? So this is the next time you eat a Caesar salad, you can remember this cartoon. The fact that they're making cartoons about GMO shows that it's arrived. Cartoons are like mirrors of our culture. They show us what we're thinking about, what we're doing, what's happening. So here's one of my favorites. What to serve to meet most dietary restrictions. This qualifies for everything. There's not one diet that this does not fit into, right? Sometimes you have to look at the cartoon twice to get it. Some of you haven't got it. All right, look at the bar in his hand. Okay. And sometimes the humor goes to like puerile grade school, maybe humor. How many people were ordering from Uber Eats or DoorDash during the pandemic, the lockdown, right? This has become part of our culture now. And that's the thing. It's like looking at the cartoons and noticing that some of the jokes in the cartoons would not have been relevant 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Cartoons represent what's happening in the zeitgeist now. Anybody ever been to Machu Picchu? How many tea drinkers do we have here? Anybody drinks tea? All kinds of tea? How many people here like Earl Grey tea? Exactly. Exactly. You have to kind of, it grows on you for a second. Okay. So a lot about medicine that we perceive, besides the amazing things that Western medicine has, a lot of it is about cost. And a lot of the conversation is about the relatively high cost of medicine. And we can see the evolution of the symbol for medicine in this cartoon. And this is a theme that comes over and over again in the cartoons. I probably got 20 or 30 of these cartoons on that theme, the high cost of conventional medicine. And then, of course, they always like to make fun of hospitals. Is there anybody who doesn't get that one? If you don't get it, raise your hand and we'll have somebody come translate for you. So this is why cartoons go beyond the verbal pun. There's a visual aspect. So here's, seeing your cardiologist takes on a whole new meaning when you've got the Jack of Hearts, right? So but this next one is one of my favorite because it's more existential and existentially relevant. Seeing your dermatologist. Do we have any medical doctors here? We had one, didn't we have a medical doctor? And sometimes the joke is kind of okay. So. Sometimes if it is change one letter. That's all. It changes the whole thing, right? I love these guys. We're all getting older, so there's lots of concern about aging. And, they say, 50 is the new 40 and 70 is the new 60 and all that kind of stuff. It's just a number. So this cartoon plays on the whole issue of numbers. Or this cartoon here dealing with adult situations. Okay. So this one, it's hard to tell because it's kind of billowing with the... This is the Senior Citizen Center 50 years after the tattoo, and they're trying to remember what the original tattoo was. And this is actually going to happen. A lot of the people with tats, no disrespect, I'm not dissing tats. The cartoon is just plain, it's part of our culture. But in 50 years, some of these tats will sag a little bit and they may not have the same clarity. How many people know Mr. Potato Head? This was actually a birthday card somebody sent me a few years ago, and I had to scan it. I had to have it scanned because it's too good. And this is not one you want to hear. that your autopsy, the results of your autopsy. But they're in the cartoons. They're in the newspapers almost every day. And AI is getting a lot of traction because, again, the cartoons are reflecting our culture. I'm not worried about AI because I still haven't found much evidence that there's any intelligence anyway.
Artificial anyway.
And this is when AI gets to the point where it becomes so advanced that it becomes self-reflective. Existential. Okay. Can we go on? Move on? Again, the point simply is that these things that are part of our news cycle and our culture show up in the cartoons where we can look at them and see the curiousness, the absurdity, even the hypocrisy sometimes. And if you're into the culture wars, which I'm not really, and this thing about drags and, men wearing skirts, I want you to know it's not always such a bad thing. So, and it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, it's not, actually, I didn't phrase that properly, but they're not the only ones. They don't necessarily own this space. My family comes from a long line. Blumenthal was a translation that they came over. When they came over, in the old country, it was Neanderthal. And this is a family photo from going back, although they didn't have color photography back then. We colorized it just for tonight. So I'm from El Paso, by the way. Anybody know where El Paso is? Anybody know where El Paso is? Yeah? I'm going to show you where El Paso is so you understand what we're talking about here. To give it perspective, El Paso is, you see that on the map there? Where I like to have the big perspective on where things are. Actually bigger even, now that we have the Hubble and the James Webb. Even the James Webb. If you're not looking at the NASA photos from James Webb, you're missing out. They're astonishing, literally. And they're saying now that there's probably 400 billion stars in the Milky Way alone, our Milky Way, our home, and there could be 1 billion galaxies, just to give you perspective here. So getting back to where we are, by the way, I will tell you, and this is true, my grandmother on my father's side, Martha Michelson, her father was the first cousin to Albert Michelson, who's the first American to win the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1907 for his discovery in the 1890s while working at Case Western Reserve, because he discovered c, the speed of light. So my father's mother's family related to the scientist from Germany who came to the United States and discovered the speed of light. I think he was off. So I've had board members and people are concerned about my age still running ABC, and more concerned than they are about my health. They're concerned that I might get, aliens might pick me up and take me, and then what's going to happen? That's my preference, actually. So if you can put a good word in for me, please, this is how I'd like to go. So today is my brother Steve's 75th birthday, my little brother. And there we are with our first dog, Trixie, in our neighborhood in El Paso. That was probably 1950 or 54, 52. I've been in the community a long time. I have a lot of friends. I was the Texas bottler for Ginseng Rush Soda back in 1979 to 1980, 81, 82. Somebody sent this to me. I don't know who it is, but somebody wrote to me something about this is what happens when you drink too much Ginseng Rush. I'm not sure that's true, but I'll tell you about Ginseng Rush because tonight's talk is about 50 years as the Herbal Cowboy. I've only been the Herbal Cowboy for 43 years because it was in May of 1980 when John Travolta was promoting, and they were promoting the Urban Cowboy movie, and I was bottling ginseng rush, I got the idea to goof John Travolta. The idea was to goof John Travolta with the Herbal Cowboy. And this is a true story. I had the honor of meeting John Travolta in September, this last September. I had the honor of attending the celebration of life for a dear friend, Olivia Newton-John, and I was at her celebration of life, and John Travolta was there, and I suspected he might be, and I had this keyed up on my iPhone, and I went up to him and I told him had been in the herb business for years, and that back in 1980 when he was doing Urban Cowboy, I did this, and I showed it to him, and he looked at it and he said to me, "You're a lot cuter than I was." So my daughter thinks that should go on my tombstone. So I've been a cowboy. I'm from Texas, so we played the cowboy game. Back in 2008, New Hope, a woman named Vicki Euland, flew down to Austin for a couple of days, and she interviewed me for this natural legacy thing for New Hope, which I'm grateful for. And one of the questions she asked me was, "What are you most proud of in your career so far?" And I didn't have an answer because I'm not about pride. I was not raised to be proud. I was raised to be of service and to serve others and be grateful. My parents taught me to be grateful for everything and anything. So my answer was not that I was proud, but I was grateful that I had 3 wonderful friends who helped me start ABC, and I'll introduce you to them in a few minutes, and some other friends as well. I went to high school in El Paso in 1916. Our high school just had its, in 2016, its centennial. And I was active in student affairs, had 2 paper routes in the morning. Anybody here ever have a paper route? Throw newspapers? Anybody here know what a newspaper is? So I ran for student council when I was a junior, and I won because back then in 1963, the big magazine that if you were cool that you were reading was Mad Magazine. And my friend Bill Glass, who was an artist, we put together this ad campaign for my student council president. It was a gonzo Gunter Thompson type campaign. It had nothing to do with any issues, but the Mad About Mark just flooded the school and people loved it, and I won, and I beat a senior cheerleader, which never had happened before apparently. And I was a junior. That's a picture of me as my student council picture from the yearbook. So this last September, they invited me back as one of the outstanding ex-students. And that was interesting and fun and great, but aside from being the Herbal Cowboy, I'm an outstanding ex-student of El Paso High, which I'm very grateful. It's a great high school, and I have a lot of friends. I went to the University of Texas as an undergraduate. I was a political science and philosophy major, but I also took an unofficial major. I studied botany unofficially, and since 1966, I've been particularly botanically interested in this botanical. And anybody watch the Big Bong Theory on TV? One of my favorite shows. It's brilliant, by the way. One of the most intelligently written sitcoms there is. Big Bong Theory, I love it. So back in the 60s, there was a lot of issues around civil rights. There was a lot of issues around the war. And in 68, when I was graduating from college, I was talking to Rich about this because he had the same issues more or less. They pulled out the graduate deferment out from under us, and I became a vegetarian as a war protest in May of 1968. And I'm still a vegetarian 55 years later. And thank you. But I didn't understand the health reasons or the economic reasons or the environmental reasons for it. I did it for moral, emotional reasons as a war protest. I didn't want to kill people. I didn't want to pay people to kill animals for me. But I started going to health food stores in May of 68, and they were very different back there. They were pill shops with foods for special dietary use. And I started going into these stores to learn about vegetarianism, and they had all these herbal teas. I went into the Army. I got into the reserves. I was fortunate to get into a reserve unit instead of getting drafted for Vietnam. So that I served. I did not serve the full 6 years, but that's another story for another time. But I did get an honorable discharge. And if you're going to be around later at the bar, I'll tell you that story, how I got out. After serving in the military for a year and a half, my old college roommate and I ended up in New Mexico on a commune called Tree Frog near Penasco, New Mexico, where we kind of lived out of the Whole Earth catalog. And I lived in my van, my 67 Chevy van, with a lot of friends. That was during the hippie days. It was 1970. So the San Francisco scene had already happened, the Flower Children, and all of that kind of commune stuff was happening. This is the house I built, which is still standing. I built this house in 1970 in New Mexico. It's up there. It's built in A-frame, 16 by 20 feet, enough room. And I was about 25 or 26 at the time, living up in the commune. And Drake made a comment about this a few minutes ago when Drake Sadler, that was Drake Sadler of Traditional Medicinals, about the time that we did some mycological research together back in the day. If anybody recognizes Drake, or Dr. Ake as we call him. So a lot of people back in those days went to Canada. Some had gone to Canada. I didn't. I stayed here. Toughed it out, so to speak. Oh, yes. So I got into the herb business. I got into the ginseng business, and I started selling herbs at a company called Sweetheart Herbs. We were a wholesale business selling herbs all over the country, but mainly in the South, Texas area, Southwest area, ginseng and all kinds of other herbs eventually. One of my first suppliers back in 1974, 1975, so almost 50 years ago, was a company called East Earth Herbs in Oregon, and it was Peggy and Bill Brevoort living in Reedsport, Oregon. In order for me to call Peggy up and place an order, I had to call a ship-to-shore radio phone. They didn't have a landline. They lived on an island off the coast, and it was like scenes from the underground. And they were selling me this ginseng bee secretion stuff from China that the FDA didn't like, and I think they brought it in on submarines or something. I don't know how they got it in the country, but I think back in the day, we had to kind of do what we had to do. Ethan Russo already told you that my name Blumenthal means Flower Valley. That was the trademark I had for my herbs and spices. And in 1980, I introduced essential oils to the health food industry. The first line of essential oils in little blue bottles, in little racks, with a little booklet that explained how to use the oils that Stephen Foster and I wrote. And the first page, when you open up this book on essential oils, besides seeing a picture, you saw an important caution on the very first page. And I had health food store owners saying, Mark, people aren't buying your oils. We can't sell them because they open up the booklet and there's a caution and they get freaked out and they won't buy it. And I said, good, that's not our customer. We don't want anybody using our essential oils who aren't going to follow directions and use them responsibly, because they can be potentially misused if people don't use them properly. And we told people about where the oils come from and what their traditionally modern uses are and stuff. And I think somebody mentioned also, I used to be in the hot sauce business. I made hot cha-cha in 1980. The first salsa that was salt-free, and we were selling truckloads of salsa in the natural food and gourmet market and the grocery markets here in California. And I just got into the business because I didn't like the salsas that were available at the time because they were full of salt. And the chips had enough salt in them. You didn't need to add more salt. But we didn't realize that having salt-free opened up a whole new market for our salsa that nobody else had because it was salt-free. So There was the Herb Trade Association that I helped start with Ben Zeracor and a bunch of people in 1976, the first herbal association. And then I'm grateful to have been a founding board member of the UNPA and then of the Herb Research Foundation. And here's the first, here they are in Colorado, the first board of the Herb Trade Association. And we were so hippie. We had Jay Hughes, the founder of Nature Sunshine. He and his brother Gene. He's the guy with a tie on, the only one with a tie on. And the rest are kind of hippies, except for Sam Pfister on the 5 out of those 10 people are still alive today. Unfortunately, the 2 out of the 3 in the front row, which were the tri-presidents. We wouldn't put all of our energy into one president. We had a tri-president. We spread the power. So it was Caroline McDougall of Ticino, and Barry Meltzer, the late Barry Meltzer of San Francisco Herb Company, and Ben Zeracor, the late Ben Zeracor of Famali Herb Company, the first 3 presidents. And here are some of us again in 1979 in Austin, Texas, the part of the board of the Herb Trade Association. There's Drake. Can you not recognize Drake back there? Everybody get Drake? He's the tall one. I'll describe him as the tall one. That's all it needs to be done. So before Herbalgram, there was Herb News, which I published for the Herb Trade Association. So basically, it's been about 45 years that I've been actually publishing in the herb field, although Herbalgram, this is number 1 and number 137, respectively. Herbalgram, the first issue came out in summer 1983. So as of today, Herbalgram is 40 years old. This is the first day of summer. First day of summer. We just had the solstice, right? Or yesterday. So this, and look, Herb Trade Association defunct is the first one. Herb News, which was the name of the journal or the newsletter, in hibernation, HCA. So that was the news at the time. So 45 years of publishing in the herbal field now. And Garfield this week is also 45, by the way, just to honor another birthday, another milestone. Here's Herbalgram number 2. The top story is the Famali herb case. And my hat's off to Stephen Daniels. Where are you, Stephen? Thank you for your kind comments. All of you all, thank you for those of you who were foolish enough to get in front of a camera and say something, but kind enough, thank you. Stephen Daniel, I think Michael McGuffin of UNPA's, he gets credit, I think, for turning you on to the idea. But we had, of this Famali case, which was Ben Zeracor's company, they went after the FDA for their too narrow and limited interpretation of safety for the grass determination, because they were saying that it had to be narrow, it had to be safety documented in the United States. And Famali's position was it could be safety documented anywhere, which opened up 10 years before DSHEA was passed, opened up the floodgates, so to speak, to all kinds of herbal material that could come into the country. Otherwise, FDA was trying to keep it out at the time. I want to hats off to Rob McCaleb, my co-partner back in the early days of Herbalgram, former lab researcher and head of research at Celestial Seasoning, a wonderful human being. And there's a picture of Rob down when he back in those days. And also a hats off to Barbara B.J. Johnston, who was the managing editor of Herbalgram for 17 years. She passed about 4 or 5 years ago in her 80s. Wonderful person. And back in the day at Anaheim, I'd hand out free copies of Herbalgram. They were like the April Fool's edition of Herbalgram. We keep talking about, Lauren and I keep talking about, we should bring back Herbalgram someday. We should do that. And even when when the Satanic Verses was big, we did the Botanic Verses, etc. We were spoofing everything we could back in the day. So the issue was the fact that people have a very limited knowledge of plants. People don't understand plants. And so the idea was to try to give people a better understanding of the historical, traditional, anthropological, and now emerging science on herbs, Whereas there wasn't much reporting on science back then because there wasn't much science at the time, but it was starting to happen in Germany, and we were one of the very first organizations and publications to start systematically reporting to people what's going on with science. And a lot of people have a difficult relationship with information. A lot of people have a hard time understanding things or what to do with information, but our position is be accurate, be responsible, be authoritative, check the facts, peer review everything, because herbs at the time were like the Rodney Dangerfield of medicine. They had no respect. And part of what we've tried to do was bring respect to the table with respect to herbs and show physicians and pharmacists and nurses and dietitians and journalists and other healthcare providers and researchers and Congress people, regulators, that there is a growing body of evidence supporting the safe and rational use of herbs in modern healthcare and self-care. Now, some of this herbal information is something we know already from our culture. Does anybody doesn't know about asparagus and what it can do? Anybody, raise your hand, we'll explain it to you. Meet us over here afterwards, right over here, and I'll explain. Stephen Foster and I decided, well, for ABC, when we started in 1988, I said, we got to take Herbalgram to another level. We got to take Herbalgram to a level of being a scientific American of herbs. Not newsletter, but a full-time project for me. And we chose echinacea for these reasons as our totem logo. For all these reasons, because it made sense. And remember, back in 1988, echinacea was not as well known then as it is now 35 years later. Herbalgram is 40, ABC is 35. Because we did Herbalgram for 5 years for UNPA and the Herb Research Foundation until I started ABC. This is a stained glass window that the late Dr. Dennis Owang did of our logo that's in our at ABC. So when I said I was grateful to the founders of ABC, I want to shout out to Jim Duke, the leading medicinal plant expert at the United States Department of Agriculture at the time, just retired. Dr. Norman R. Farnsworth, at the time still one of the world's most widely known research professors of pharmacognosy, where Holly got her PhD. Good for you, Holly. And shortly, several years after, when he retired from being the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Purdue University, after 20 years of being the Dean of the College of Pharmacy at Purdue and the author of the 6 editions of the textbook on pharmacognosy, Professor Vero Tyler. These are basically the founders of ABC with me, and I'm grateful, not proud, but grateful that these people put their stock into ABC and Herbalgram and put their name on the letterhead, which opened up all kinds of doors for us. And also, when I started ABC, I had been a consultant, among other things, to Nature's Way and to Ken Murdoch and his company, and Lauren had just come into Nature's Way in 1980, I believe it was. And I was one of their consultants on herbs, and I had to go to Ken and say, Ken, I want to quit being a consultant to you. I want to start this organization to take Herbalgram from newsletter to magazine format and journal format, and I want more money. And Lauren saw the vision. Lauren helped inflate and propel the vision. Ken bought it. Jan Komps was the Madhouse, the German pharmaceutical phytomedicine company, and later Anton Groff. These are the guys that helped make sure there was money to make the first check for ABC so we could have letterhead, stationery, a fax machine. 1988. We didn't have email till 10 years later. And he wasn't officially one of the founders of ABC, but he was. His DNA is all over everything we've done, and his DNA is all over this organization. And I want to shout out to my dear friend, like a brother, Stephen Foster, who left us a year and a half ago just on the cusp of turning 65, whose imprint on the herbal movement is always going to be felt because of the compelling photography His photography has graced about 60 or 65 covers of Herbalgram. I'll show you a few in a moment. These are some of the key ABC publications that we deal with. One of the first things Stephen and I wanted to do, instead of trying to create a bunch of stuff of our own, let's reprint a lot of the stuff that's already in the literature that's important about pharmacognosy, ethnobotany, etc. Let's get this stuff out to health professionals. Let's get it out to industry. Let's get it out to the media. And so we did 4 issues, like 45 or 50 articles from the scientific literature in our classic botanical reprints. Plus we did 15 or 16 of these botanical booklets that we sent to all kinds of reporters and newspapers. We printed like 10,000 copies of each one, times 15. And when one of our publications, we printed over 1 million copies. A 1-page brochure, a 2-page brochure that on a fold when the Shea was passed, showing different herbs and what their potential benefits were. And companies bought them by the thousands and the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands in order to spread them out in health food stores as the very first, what was it called? Section 5. Lauren, what's it called? Third-party literature. Third-party literature. Thank you. Yeah. We were like the first herbal third-party literature. We had the first major herbal catalog. We had like over 400 books, most of them, and CDs, most of them technical and reference books. And Professor Farnsworth said, even if you don't buy a book, just reading our catalog gives you such an information about how deep and how wide the herbal world is from a scientific perspective. Just reading the catalog. Don't buy anything. Just read the catalog. It's astonishing what was in there. So we're into research. We're a nonprofit research and education organization promoting research. And so one of the first things we did was start Herb Clip in 1992. And Herb Clip started because I couldn't pay some of the bills. We had accounts receivable and accounts delayable. We were constantly underfunded. And under the accounts delayable, I'm looking with my accountant, Cecilia, who was in one of the videos earlier, and we had $600 we owed to the copier toner company, and that was 2 months of copier toner. And I said, why do we owe $600 for copier toner? And she said, well, Mark, in addition to everything we need copies for, it's all those damn articles you send to all your friends. Because I was taking all these magazine and newspaper and journal articles from my desk and clipping them and having somebody photocopy them and fold them and staple them and spindle, and then mail them. I had no idea what was costing us, and I didn't realize it was costing so much money just to be sharing information with all these friends. So I picked up the phone and I called Jim Beck at Solar Ray and Ken Murdoch at Nature's Way, and I said, hey Jim, hey Ken, how would you like to have a clipping service? This is 1992. It was a clipping service. This is before the internet, before email. And they said, Jim says, I called Jim first, and he said, and Jim just passed 2021, unfortunately. That's his picture that's on his. And I said, Jim, how would you like to have a clipping service? He said, how much? And I almost said $100 a month, and I bit my tongue. I said, $300 a month is fine. Send me a bill. And we generated $53,000 or $54,000 that year in Herb Clip, $88,000 the second year, and $117,000 the third year from companies supporting us. And we were sending out hundreds and hundreds of copies of these articles to people all over the world. The commissioning monographs has been mentioned, thanks to Vero Tyler, Professor Tyler, who got us to translate and publish this. This helped establish a baseline for safety and rational use when people were concerned about herbs during the Shea issues, because they were concerned about, we know about vitamins, but what about these herbs? And we used the commissionee as the basis for the first pharmacy continuing education course in this country that was accredited for pharmacists based on herbs. It was based on the commissionee. Our book, Common Herbs, in 2003. Commissionee came out in 1998. This book, which was accredited for pharmacists, physicians, nurses, dietitians, naturopaths, 2003. Book that Dr. Tyler was the English editor of, and I took over in 2004. It's the English edition of a German textbook. A book we produced on identifying plants with Missouri Botanical Garden. We have pharmacy and dietitian interns at ABC. We have a major role with the media influencing what they publish by providing them scientific information, although we had nothing to do with this article. We did not seed that article. We used to seed a number of articles, but not that one. Ethan Russo mentioned our pharmacy from the rainforest ethnobotany ecotour, which started in 1994. We went down to the Amazon with Jim Duke and others and looked at the plants, and then eventually went to Belize, Costa Rica, Africa, etc., even Germany, which was certainly not a rainforest, but. And did anybody go? Anybody here go on one of our trips to the rainforest? Amazing. And it was wonderful. We'd have about 25, 35 people in the Amazon, and then they went on to Machu Picchu. Jim Duke was one of our primary teachers and friends, and Antonio Montero Pisco, our shaman, and ayahuasquero. They're both passed now. This is Don Antonio. I always loved the animals down there. Got lonely. I love the animals. No, just kidding. Anyway, so Machu Picchu, amazing place. Got to go there someday. So in Herbalgram, what we did was we tried to communicate not just the science, but also the history, the richness, the tradition of herbs and medicinal plants, and how different cultures have used herbs for medicines throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia. This was Tibetan. This is about the famous ethnobotanist Richard Schultes in the Amazon, the Harvard botanist, article by Wade Davis. Amazing. And Lauren mentioned Wade the other day because it was through Wade's writing that Lauren was turned on to our speaker this morning, basically. African traditional medicine. All kinds of themes. History of herbal medicine. From the Robert Tom series, published by Park Davis in the 1950s on the history of medicine, history of pharmacy, these paintings that are incredible that were found as posters in pharmacy and medical schools. It took us several years to get permission because Park Davis got bought out by Warner Lambert, which got bought out by Pfizer. And eventually we got permission to reprint some of these photos, some of these paintings, which are incredible, and the information about them. And this is just part of that. Mexico. The Diego Rivera. It took me 3 years to get permission to reprint the Diego Rivera mural portion that deals with herbal medicine. And the first medical book of the New World, the Badianas manuscript in 1552. The point is we're constantly showing people the beauty of plants, the history of plants, the lore of plants, and how plants and people work together because plants are what makes our lives allowable on this planet. We published the first monograph for Roy Upton in the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia in Herbalgram in 97, I think, the St. John's Wort monograph. Tons of articles. Can't go through all of them. Even though Herbalgram 40, we could go through and spend lots of time just going through a lot of the articles that we covered. And this is some of the stuff that we published. The Health Freedom Act, 1992. This is the act that Senator Hatch, with Lauren and other people's support, introduced and eventually came back in the next Congress as DeShay when they updated it. And we had all kinds of ways that we were communicating to people from a legal regulatory point of view, science point of view. This is the European American Phytomedicines Coalition, which was Lauren's brainchild along with Bob Pinko, who was a former FDA attorney who was in charge of the over-the-counter drug review. Okay, this is pre-DeShay. If we can't let's try to get herbs approved as over-the-counter medicines. Let's submit the data we have on ginger and valerian to see if we can get enough data in front of FDA to approve it at the ginger and valerian respectively as over-the-counter medicines. Here's all the data available on the safety and the efficacy. FDA didn't buy it. Long story short, didn't happen. But that also raised some of the energy about passing DeShay for herbs as foods, as dietary supplements. We were involved with the World Health Organization for their guidelines of the assessment of herbal medicines in 1990. Articles by Professor Tyler about the research showing the benefits of herbs as medicine, articles by Jim Duke showing botanical alternatives to drugs, on and on and on. And some of our articles are 10, 12,000, 15,000, heavily peer-reviewed articles with extensive references that are seminal articles for others. A monthly newsletter, Herbal Egram, a weekly newsletter, Herbal News and Events, that correlates and collates all kinds of information. We just published our 9,000th herb clip in February. So that situation where we couldn't pay the bill for the copier toner, now, what is it, almost 30 years later, we have 9,000 of those 2 to 3 page summaries. Jackie Wooten mentioned the database, HerbMed Pro, which we've taken over from her and expanded, which is an amazing. And I don't have time to explain all this stuff to you, but we are really grateful to the supporters that we have. But one of the things that we continually communicate among many different themes about safety and efficacy is the issue of conservation and sustainability of botanicals, because that is such an important part of the zeitgeist and the necessity of survival for our planet. And I don't know if you can read all that. So I'm deeply grateful to my friends who are supportive of the idea of sustainability and having a smaller footprint on the planet, because it's astonishing to me that people are in denial about this still. This is essential oil spill. So where I'm leading up to is our conservation-related issues. We've covered conservation's Herbalgram number 2. Here's Herbalgram number 15 about wild lady slippers. We were successful in getting UNPA to, I think it's policy recommendation number 1, trade recommendation number 1 from UNPA was to get members of the industry to stop selling lady slipper root, which at the time was a sedative herb that you found offered by almost every supplier, but it's a threatened or endangered plant. You don't need it. We did an update on that. We cover all kinds of articles, including 21 years from the time the golden seal was CITES 2 indexed as a threatened plant and by CITES and updated it. There were cover stories. In 2009, climate change. Is it impacting medicinal plants? Question mark. The first article ever published on the impact of the climate change issue on the availability of medicinal and aromatic plants. And then 10 years later, a whole issue, dedicated to the theme. So our Sustainable Herbs program, you saw Ann Armbrecht, incredible website that she's put together. She's a Harvard PhD in anthropology or social anthropology. A beautiful website, free access. Anybody can access it for free. It's a beautiful website full with over 50 videos, all kinds of projects going on with the Sustainable Herb program, all kinds of webinars, especially during the lockdown. We did webinars for free. Anybody could access them. We've had over 50,000. We've got version 2.0 of our toolkit. I encourage anybody with an herb company to look at this toolkit. It shows you how you can get on the path, or if you're already on the path, how you can get further on the path towards sustainability for any kind of business, basically, especially if you're in the herb field. And in March, we just published a 21-minute video on regenerative agricultural projects in Costa Rica dealing with medicinal plants. It's incredible. We just held a webinar for health professionals explaining to them why they should be interested in the future availability and the quality of medicinal plants that it's being affected by the climate change. And a shout out to all the good companies that are inaugural underwriters, including UNPA. Lauren was one of the first. Jim Emmy was one of the very first supporter of this project. Thank you, Jim. And other underwriters that have come along. I appreciate that. Ann's book, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. It's incredible. The Business of Botanical. It's a really good book about the history of the modern herbal movement in the United States one other thing before I close, and it's about dark matter. And dark matter, I'm referring to things that are not really real, but dark matter is real. This was in Parade Magazine, Sunday Supplement, years ago. It's about dietary supplements. We've been talking about this. We talked about it yesterday. Authenticity, quality, reality. Back in the late 1970s, there were people selling so-called wild red American ginseng to health food stores throughout the Southwest. The Herb Trade Association, when I was president, published its policy statement number 1. It's an anonymous report that I wrote with the help of Dr. Farnsworth that we took around to the health food stores showing that this so-called wild red American ginseng is fraudulent. It's not ginseng. It's not related to ginseng by family, by chemistry, by any stretch of the imagination. And we got it off the market because we exposed it as a fraud through education. We published back in 1985 the first information about the adulteration of echinacea with Parthenium integrifolium. We published about the substitution of skullcap with germander, which is a hepatotoxic, which has one of the few examples of adulteration in the modern herbal community or industry that has health-related impact from a toxicology or safety perspective. Most of the information we have about the adulteration is not really a safety issue. It's just a question of activity and efficacy. And we helped the Texas Department of Health and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration with the so-called black pearls, which are these Chinese balls of black little balls the size of a blueberry or smaller that they were selling in health food stores coming from Hong Kong for arthritis and inflammation, but they were full of undisclosed drugs. Pharmaceutical drugs. They were fraud. It was basically illegal pharmaceutical drugs masquerading as an herbal supplement. And we basically, back in 1990 in Herbalgram, we basically created that phrase with illegal drugs masquerading as herbs or supplements. These are not herbs. These are not supplements. They're illegal drugs pretending like that. We helped get that information out there. In 1990s, we had tested 500 commercial ginseng products sold in North America at 2 university laboratories, Illinois and Ottawa, University of Ottawa, based on an analytical method that we developed for this program that is now the USP method. We found out that about 25% of the ginseng products sold in North America were either mislabeled or adulterated. We publish our annual herb market report, thanks to the folks at Spins and Informa for being partners with us on that. And very quickly, the ones in yellow are the ones that we have documented are adulterated. This is the health food channel, the mainstream channel. This is the health food channel, some of the same herbs in different ranking of order. But here's the information. 36% in the mainstream, up to 55% of the herbs in health food. Of the top 22 found in the previous 2 slides are subject to adulteration. That doesn't say that they're all adulterated. They're subject to adulteration. We're writing an article right now. It's very challenging on some 5 of the most popular herbs in the market to try to determine to what extent are they adulterated. We know they're subject to adulteration. How much adulteration is there on that herb? Is it 5%? Is it 20%? Is it 45%? With ginkgo, based on 28 publications in the scientific literature, it's 57% of the ginkgo products that were tested were adulterated. 57%. Is that acceptable to anybody here? Raise your hand if that's acceptable to you. Of course not. It's about quality control. It's about identity. We're concerned about identity of the plants that we're trying to educate people about their safety and the research supporting. So we started 13 years ago the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program Here's another picture of me back in the day. And here's the thing, this is a global issue. This is not an American issue. It's a global issue, and because there's always a bad apple in the barrel, but the problem is there's so many barrels. There's lots of barrels out there. And there are many, 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 many companies with ethical, responsible, caring leadership who really care about the quality of the ingredients they put in their products and the quality of the experience that their consumers have using their products. The problem is these bad apples. But this is a historical problem. It's gone back for thousands of years, and our first publication under BAP was Stephen Foster's article, which I encourage you to read. Everything we publish on BAP is free access. I encourage you to read this article if you haven't already. A Brief History of Adulteration of Herbs, Spices, and Botanical Drugs, going back to Greco-Roman times 2,000 years ago. We've documented this. A shout out to Stefan Gaffner, our Chief Science Officer, who's been promoted, or you might say demoted, to director of BAP now, because now he has to deal with management now instead of science. We've published all kinds of bulletins. Today, I don't know if you saw your email today, but ABC just published its 27th bulletin, this one on the adulteration of elderberry. This is a list of all the herbs that we have published on that are for bulletins that are adulterated. We have laboratory guidance docs, and here's our elderberry published today, June 22nd. We were the first publication, Herbalgram, in 2021, in the scientific literature documenting the adulteration of elderberry. It's not in the scientific literature, just said last couple of years. We also analyze and evaluate laboratory methods to see if they're fit for purpose. To date, we have published 81 peer-reviewed papers and newsletters and documents about adulteration, all peer-reviewed. And they're totally free access to anybody in the world who wants them. And we get lots of reports from companies who are using our content to set specifications for their herbs. And in setting specifications, they sometimes have to revise their previous specifications, and that sometimes means they have to revise the companies from whom they're buying, because the companies they're buying from are not able to meet the revised specifications. Do you understand what that means? It presumes that they're increasing the quality of their material and consumers are getting a better product. And all this is free thanks to our supporters, our monitor. And two examples. Here's saw palmetto. We know it's being adulterated with palm oil and cheaper oils, but it's also being adulterated with animal fat from sheep, pigs, cows, and chickens from China. Thanks to Indina for some of the information on that analysis back in 2017. Saw palmetto extract being adulterated with animal fats taken from animals, fractionated out, and then recombined to meet the ratio of those fats in the European and US pharmacopoeias. And if you don't know what you're doing and using the wrong methodology, you might authenticate material that is adulterated. This is something Shaheen knows about because his former company used to really do a lot of work in this area, and that's the detection of synthetic curcuminoids in turmeric extract. Some of those curcuminoids have been implicated in potential liver toxicity. We have published 2 articles, one in 2020 in this scientific journal, Acta Horticultura, and a few months ago in Journal of Natural Products, a revised article documenting the adulteration that is happening in order to game the system, to fool. The adulterators are trying to fool the analytical tests in the laboratories. They're trying to game the system. And if you don't know what you're doing laboratory-wise, you might use an inappropriate method that's not fit for purpose. And these are all the methods that have been gamed based on an herb-by-herb basis. Everybody should be looking at this article if you're handling any kind of botanical material that we've documented are adulterated. Again, most of this adulteration is intentional fraud. The bad news is that it's fraud. The good news, if there is any, is that it is not having a toxicological safety problem, except for a few exceptions. And we have introduced last year at Supply Side our Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program standard operating procedure on the disposal and destruction of irreparably defective articles a new term that we've created, a new regulatory term, irreparably defective article. It's something that cannot be lawfully remediated. It's so out of spec that even a legitimate way to try to recondition it won't work under the law, because it is either so contaminated or so adulterated it cannot be lawfully remediated, which means you have to take it out of the supply chain. Don't send it back to the supplier. And we're getting support thanks to Lauren and UNPA, the first trade association to support this. Also, the British Herbal Medicine Association, Council for Responsible Nutrition. We have nonprofit organizations in the medical area that are supporting this and endorsing it. We have labs and certifiers that are supporting it. Thank you, Elon, for supporting this and being an early supporter of this. And these companies, including Whole Foods Market and others, and Jim Emmy, who's also an early adopter and supporter of this project, and Pharmavite and others, Nature's Way, etc., are supporting this program. And we're getting new endorsers on a weekly basis, although we're not out there doing a full court press campaign. We don't have the bandwidth to do that, but we're inviting people to come in and endorse this and support it, because if something is irreparably defective, it doesn't belong in our supply chain. It needs to be taken out, and we can't wait for the government to come do it. It's the industry's problem. It needs to go to the landfill or to the incinerator. People have a moral responsibility and ethical compulsion, or it's compelling. They need to get it out. So that's why we say, burn it, don't return it, because we know that sometimes in the past with some of this stuff, people have sent it back to their supplier. Guess what happens when they send it back to the supplier? Sometimes, who knows how many times, it gets back into the supply chain. So I'm almost finished. I know you're waiting to get out of here. I don't blame you. I would too. I should leave now. Anyway, I want to honor, one of the things about Herbal Grand that we do at ABC is we honor the people in our community whose contributions we may or may not know about, but in some way, directly or indirectly, we benefit from. And every issue of Herbal Grand has tributes, memorials to the people in the academic community, the scientific community, the herbal community, etc., who've contributed something to botanical medicine. This is just a short list of people in 2022. It's certainly not complete. It grows, unfortunately, weekly, unfortunately. When these, it's a cliche. Mark Plotkin has said this, the botanist and author and friend of ABC, has said, when one of these old men or women die, these shaman, these knowledgeable people who know about herbal medicine, when they die, and who know about their culture, when they die, it's like a whole library burning down. Well, it's not just those people in indigenous societies. It's the people in our society, in our culture. Fortunately, it's not like a library burning down for us, because we're holding on to the information and codifying, because we have the ability to do that with our culture, with our computers, with our libraries, etc. I want to do homage to my life partner and wife, the beautiful Jacqueline, amazing Jacqueline Small. I'm one of the luckiest men in the world to have health, meaning and purpose, love in my life, friendships, and this incredible woman who's the author of 10 books, who is constantly keeps me amazed, and hearts out to her. I showed this slide earlier, but one of the things was missing, and that's in the middle. One of the new things that ABC is working on, which we have not announced yet, is our new project on videos called Herb TV. We already own the YouTube channel Herb TV, and over the next coming months, we intend to do a soft launch on more information coming out in video through our Herb TV channel. Stay tuned for that, literally. And before I close, gratitude to all you all, and especially Lauren. I had no idea this was going to happen tonight, except for this. These are the UNPA members that are also members of ABC and or supporters of the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program and or Sustainable Herbs Program, or all the above, and or adopters of herbs on our HerbMedPro database. So as far as I'm concerned, it's probably true to say that percentage-wise, UNPA membership represents some of the best practices or the best practices company percentage-wise of any organization I'm aware of, because you all are supporting ABC and what we do. I know that's somewhat reflexive, but it's true, and I'm grateful to all you all and those who aren't here. I couldn't pass that one up. It just came in, just found that one last week. Sorry. I hope I haven't gone too fast for you. I know I had a lot of slides. I hope I didn't go too fast. I'm an optimist. There's a lot of stuff to be concerned about in the world. There's a lot of stuff that can be depressing and dispiriting and demoralizing. But through it all, I see opportunity, and I see an opportunity to serve our brothers and sisters, our children, our grandchildren, our colleagues. There's so many ways to serve others. Gratitude to all the people, past and present, who've been part of the American Botanical Council. I have an incredible staff of employees. As you saw earlier, some of them 27, 32, 35 years of service, 15, 16. I'm so grateful to everybody at ABC. It's an amazing group of people, and the Board of Trustees, past and present. All y'all. If you're ever in Austin, Texas, come down and visit us. We are on 2.5 acres in a historic property. I want to thank all you all for sticking it out and listening to this. You've been great. Lauren, you got me, man. I don't know. And I just wish that the last few weeks of your life have been more productive in spending all this time getting this all together for me. But thank you for doing all this. Thank you all for your time and attention. Thanks for supporting us. Thank you.